Hi. Now, as you see, this panel is entitled The Grand Bargain of South Asia. I'm just going to start with a few framing remarks and suggest that the panel is mistitled because, as you know, Afghanistan has borders on all sides, not only on its east. It also has borders on the west and on the north. And therefore, it has to be a bargain of Asia, not just of South Asia. So the panelists' titles suggest that we'll be talking about Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan, but I'm suggesting that that is insufficient, and we need a broader lens. Now, just talk about what we mean by grand bargain or great game. When Afghanistan was demarcated in its current borders, going back to the period 140 years ago that Nazif Sharani mentioned, and it became dependent on the British, the reason it remained stable for so long was because there was also a deal between the British and the Russians that neither of them would enter into Afghanistan. Even though the British were subsidizing it, they would not send their own personnel or troops into it. Now that bargain started weakening with the independence of Afghanistan, many things that happened over the next decades that I will not go into, world historical events that you are familiar with, but it was finally destroyed when the Soviet Union sent its troops into Afghanistan in 1979. And that meant that the deal of keeping Afghanistan stable by others staying out of it and having a modus vivendi, say Soviet Union giving aid in the north, United States giving aid in the south and east, was ended. There was no more modus vivendi. So for 10 years, the Soviet Union alone subsidized the government, sent its forces in, and keep subsidizing the government after its forces left. And there was a reaction in the Cold War context that you all know, from the US, its ally Pakistan, and from much of the Muslim world, which led to the war of that time that destroyed the Afghan state. Then for several years, after the Soviet Union collapsed, no Cold War, Afghanistan had no international global strategic value. The result was nobody was subsidizing the state, and you had the war from 1992 onward and then for a brief period of time, Pakistan, through the Taliban, managed to gain control of most of Afghanistan, relatively stabilize it in a way. But that was destroyed because it became a home for international terrorists. And the new program for stabilizing Afghanistan was based on the American-led military operation, but an international consensus that supported it based on counterterrorism. Now, of course, Pakistan was never fully part of that international consensus and viewed the United States as potentially a protector of Indian interests in Afghanistan, and that perception has grown over time. But starting with the Declaration of Strategic Partnership in 2005, the perception grew among all the states of the region that the United States was intent on establishing itself strategically in Afghanistan for the long term in order to change the strategic balance in Central Asia. And that is why the heads of state of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization then issued a statement saying that it was time for the coalition forces to leave Central Asia. That perception hardened with the signing of the bilateral security agreement in 2014, which formalized that relationship. And that is the reason that we now see a convergence of the views of Iran, Pakistan, Russia, and China, something that is completely different from the Cold War period. So because the question now is the United States intent on stabilizing Afghanistan by making it into an American base? That's unacceptable to the other nations. But there is no other plan. So the other countries, they don't want the United States to leave, but they also don't want it to stay. So they make sure that it doesn't leave, but it doesn't consolidate. Now, if President Trump does decide to leave, they will soon have some decisions to make because that would mean the United States deciding Afghanistan does not have geostrategic importance to it, that it's more important to compete with other great powers, which is what it says in the U.S. national security strategy. So that, I believe, in a thumbnail sketch, is the moment that we're in now in the geostrategic situation of Afghanistan. Now I will turn it over to my panelists to discuss that. First, Javed Ludin.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. با اجازه دوست و راهنمای بزرگوارم دکتر سبسپانتا، دوستای عزیز، اول خود دکتر صاحب مرادیان از شما و از همکاران شما یک جان تشکر که دعوت کردین و واقعا بار اولم است که در سلسله کنفرانس ها تانستم که در بالاخره اشتراک کنم، اما واقعا یک ابتکار فوق العاده است که بسیار مقدردانی میکنم. ما اگر دوستا و بزرگوارا اجازه بدن به خاطر که خود پنل یک مقدار به مسائل منطقه و بیشتر فراتر از افغانستان ارتباط میگیره، صحبت میشه که به انگلیسی، اگرچه بارنی خوب فارسی میفهمه اما اما بنان میشه که به انگلیسی ادامه بدم. Our moderator just unilaterally decided to expand the scope of the discussion, and I think you did me a favor because I thought for an Afghan to talk about Pakistan, which is really the subject that was given to me in the program, was going to be more like a broken record again, because you've heard us talk about Pakistan before, certainly. So I'll maybe talk a little bit about the notes that I had prepared for, for that particular subject. But I think more importantly, the expanding it and looking at the region broader would be more appropriate as a grand bargain. So can Afghanistan really move beyond Pakistan? The sort of the stalemate in terms of the relationship with Pakistan. I think yes, we certainly can. There is always a way out, and I think the INUG and the National Unity Government tried in its own way to do that, and failed. Like I think we did in our government, and a number of us sitting in this room. We also tried to engage Pakistan very sincerely. But it didn't work. So I think a lot of what I said will also follow on in some way from what Christine Fair said earlier in the earlier discussion. Although I will take a very strong, Christine is not looking at me, but I'll take a very strong exception with your comment about the evil mustache thing. So, but other than that, I think you and I are in great concurrent. Yeah, he and I are not the same, but other than that too. But yeah. But I think part of the, I think the difference in terms of the approach when we tried to engage Pakistan was, and then right now, we are in a much more unhelpful relationship with Pakistan than we have been for a very, very long time. Is also that this government actually lacked the transparency in terms of approach that was very important in terms of its engagement with Pakistan. They tried to do it behind closed doors, which is really the wrong way to do. A lot of times we used to wonder whether it was a good thing that we were a lot of times, and certainly at the time I remember our Western friends that used to visit Kabul would tell us, don't take these issues out to the media, use diplomacy, talk to Pakistanis. And we used to, as diplomats, that obviously resonated with us as an approach. But I think I now know that the relationship is so fraught with history, with emotions that an approach that lacks transparency, that does not involve people in the trust of everybody, the various stakeholders in the country, different ethnic groups, different political groups. Unless you engage in that sense, you risk deepening the problems rather than solving it. So I think the other issue that in terms of a relationship with Pakistan is that we can move on from the sort of unhelpful, acrimonious dialogue with Pakistan. In a way, we Afghans have done our bit. One of the perhaps the overarching goal in terms of our strategy, as always in the last 17 years, has been to advocate with the rest of the world, but primarily, I think, we all know the United States, that Pakistan was part of the problem rather than part of the solution. It was not an ally. It was it was an enemy. And obviously that we don't need to go to history, that fell on deaf ears for many, many years. And now that that has become somewhat, especially under Trump administration, that's become somewhat official government policy. It's been taken on board. Basically, our work is done. I mean, I don't know, strategically speaking, what else we can, in a way, and I'm talking specifically in terms of the security relationship with Pakistan. So we need to now move on from the rhetoric that we have had in the last 17 years, which was about, oh, look, Pakistan is supporting the Taliban, it's where the terrorists come from and all that, and the rest of the world should take notice. That is already done. So what else do we do now? What is the new sort of policy line for the Afghan government and the Afghan people? But whether we move on or not from that, the important question is the changes in Pakistan. Will Pakistan move on? Will Pakistan give us the hope that there is a new future between the two countries? Even if I fear today is not the kind of opportunity, especially at the we are at the very last session of the day and quite exhausted, to really discuss about some of the insurmountable issues that exist between the two countries. At the end of the day, it can't be just because of a number of crazy people who happen to be involved in policy circles in Pakistan to really hold the relationship between two close neighbors, to basically hijack it. There are issues. So what are those issues? And I'll have a very, very quick reference to it rather than have a sort of a discussion about them. The question of Durand Line obviously is, especially if you're a Pakistani, and I've been hearing that they during our times, there was very little discussion, I must say, certainly from what I remember. And partly not because Pakistanis weren't thinking about it, but partly because they thought they were always coming from a position of strength. So they never raised it. Why would they talk about a boundary that they said they claimed was an official border? But I'm hearing that now it's raised much more frequently with the Afghan side and also with the United States. Now that's from their point of view, that would be an issue, and obviously you know the Afghan position. I don't need to repeat it. It's something that it is a historic issue. I don't think any government would give itself permission to really make a deal on Durand Line, or to even to begin to discuss it, unless it's supported by a massive political consensus across the country. And I fear the current government lacks that kind of a political consensus to be able to discuss such a significant issue. The other major issue that I think insurmountable issue that I will call is really the insecurity of the Pakistani establishment as well. Their relationship with India and how Afghanistan is an Indianized issue in their foreign policy. So unless that, and I call it insurmountable because really it's certainly beyond Afghanistan's reach. And I maybe look forward to comments from both Senator Khattak and also my friend Ambassador Mukhopadhya on that issue. Finally, on Pakistan, I'll just say that we on the Afghan side, indeed should think about a post-Pakistan security paradigm for ourselves. And no, I'm not saying in any way this to diminish how significant Pakistan's sort of role, influence over Afghanistan's security is right now, but we are increasingly seeing signs that they have a much more diminished role than they've had before. Taliban, I think Barney referred to it, have already diversified their foreign sponsors. They have now significant contacts among countries of the region. So I think for us, when it comes to security, we now are in a situation where we have to engage a much wider number of countries across the region than just Pakistan alone, which was really at the very center of our focus for many, many years in the past. So that's really the element number one of a post-Pakistan security strategy for Afghanistan. The other element in this sort of post-Pakistan era is the role of the United States in the peace process. We have now seen the U.S. fully taking on board the peace process and actually doing it. The appointment of Ambassador Khalilzad. For what it's worth, and I'm obviously not speaking for anyone, I think that's a positive step. I have never been against the United States talking to the Taliban, because I think it's very unrealistic for us to expect that the U.S., with such a massive stake in the country and also across the region, would not speak to the Taliban, engage with them directly, especially when talking is the only strategy you do. I do, for my own preference, I would have liked to win the war. I would have liked the American generals to talk about fighting and leave it to us diplomats to talk about peace. But when I hear American generals talking about peace being their main goal of their mission, then frankly, that's what it is. And on the Afghan side, we cannot do anything about it. So I suppose when they do that, then I think it makes sense that they take the lead. And I think they also take the lead because, again, I would emphasize that the peace process, enduring peace will come when the Afghans take over and they decide about the future, because it's not about, peace process for me is not about the having a settlement and an end to war. Ceasefire is not peace. That is a very limited goal. The real objective is an end state to peace, which is what Afghanistan will look like after the war is finished and after the Taliban have come back or some sort of a settlement is done. So that will have to be done by Afghans. Having said that, Ambassador Khalilzad has a major mission now, but again, sort of coming back to Pakistan, and I think as an Afghan, I give my, I really am I can only be disappointed to see that it took Ambassador Khalilzad only 3 weeks to secure the release of Mullah Baradar and a bunch of others from Pakistani jails, when we, Dr. Spanta and I, for years tried to negotiate with Pakistanis, and specifically about Mullah Baradar's release, and it didn't happen. So I think to see the amount of this shows how the Pakistani establishment actually sees this, the so-called Afghan-led. Am I overstepped? That was a very threatening move for you to just come. You could have sent a note. He just came like that, and I thought he was going to punch me. And finally, on the, I think the post-Pakistan thing will also involve very much to Christian Fair's point, will involve an economic strategy by Afghanistan to look away, and I cannot emphasize enough the point you made, fully in concurrence with you, Madam Fair, about how important Chabahar is, and it's not in addition to Pakistan, it's instead of Pakistan, because that's how you have to play it. I'm not saying that tomorrow, I'm in business now, so if some of my goods come from Karachi, I won't obviously say no to that, but it means that when you play it in geopolitical terms, you have to develop these routes, whether it's Chabahar or whether it's the northern route through Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan as the alternative to Pakistan. Now, very quickly on the regional picture, if I may, I think it was, you said most of it, so I'll just perhaps maybe focus a little bit on how the Afghan government can mobilize a region, the region. And there was an interesting discussion this morning about the Istanbul process. Perhaps maybe I could just clarify one thing, is that this region, Afghanistan is just a symptom of a failure that sort of effectively runs across the entire region. Whether it's security, whether it's politics, whether it's the economy, it's all an ailing region. We are sitting on massive resources. We are interconnected so deeply by culture, by demography, by you name it, yet we are divided, we are fragmented by politics. Whether you take the South Asian dimension, which we are talking here in this panel, the India, Pakistan, Afghanistan dimension, whether you take the massively complex situation in the Middle East, you take Central Asia, everything, we are divided. There are good signs, of course, and I think Uzbekistan, as we heard today, is an extremely promising scenario there. But Afghanistan can. The whole point of the Istanbul process was to give Afghanistan agency, so that the region can see Afghanistan for itself and not see it as a project of the United States, that they have to engage through the U.S. and just see it as a neighbor, see it not just as a battleground, but see it as as something of a potential. And I think we do have that potential, not because we have resources, but we are, let's accept it, we are a black hole in the middle of an extremely dynamic region, because we have, whether we take our economy, which hasn't developed, our infrastructure, whether we talk about the fact that security-wise we are not conducive to enhancing the region's security, but quite otherwise we're producing threats, unfortunately, or either producing it in the case of drugs, or just channeling it if it's in the case of terrorism, which is, we just channel it from Pakistan to Central Asia. So with all that, it would be extremely important that the Afghan government does take the regional leadership and things like the Istanbul process very seriously. I have overstepped my time, so thank you so much.
Let me just add one or two sentences before we go on. Javed talked about a post-Pakistan security paradigm. Let me suggest it might be time also for a post-American security paradigm. And let me just give you a statistic to think about. When the United States intervened in Afghanistan in 2001, the combined economies of Pakistan, Iran, Russia, and China were 70% of the economy of the United States. Today, the United States is 2/3 the size of the combined economies of those same four countries. So that is the trend. Now, Afrasiab Khattak.
Distinguished panelists, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the Afghan Institute of International Studies for holding this important conference. Herat Security Dialogue has become an annual feature which brings together academics, diplomats, political activists, analysts, and I think we need this Khorasan of ideas more than any time else to face the difficult challenges that people of this region are facing. I would agree with Professor Barnet Rubin that we can't confine ourselves to South Asia, not just because there are other countries. Yes, there are other countries. Afghanistan has northern borders, it has borders on the west. But also because, unfortunately, South Asia is a case of retarded regional cooperation. It is really lacking. It can't compete with other regions when it comes to regional cooperation. We have history of Cold War when different countries were affiliated with different camps, but also because of a very difficult relationship between India and Pakistan, which has paralyzed SARC. Afghanistan became a member of SARC and everybody welcomed it. But SARC is not really functioning, it's not operational. So if we confine ourselves to South Asia, then probably the crisis will have to wait for a longer time. So I think that's why we need to expand our horizon of discussion. Now coming to Pakistan, I think Pakistan is a very important country with 220 million people, with a great civilizational area and great potential as for economic development. But it's unfortunate that Pakistan is under the guilt of the distorted policies of military dictators. And it is sort of accused of so many things, and justifiably so, because Pakistani policies naturally were not representing the aspirations of the people of Pakistan. So it brings me to the Afghan policy of Pakistan. You see, this policy was framed in 1980s. It was part of the grand strategy of the Western powers to defeat the Soviet Union. Within this policy, there was a smaller policy followed by Pakistani generals, and that is the policy of strategic depth, which practically meant Pakistan's policy to hegemonize Afghanistan and to reduce it into an appendage in the regional level. Unfortunately, this policy has continued for the last 40 years. Pakistan has fought 4 wars in Afghanistan. The first one started in 1980. It continued up till 89. And of course, United States, Arab countries, others, everybody was a partner in this. And we have many books in Pakistan. Many Pakistani generals claim that actually they were the ones who defeated the Soviet Union and sort of demolished Berlin Wall, etc. The second war is from 1994 to 2001, up to 9/11. It was Taliban. Pakistan was openly supporting Taliban. There were other countries who were supporting other people in Afghanistan. There were proxy wars, but Pakistan really fought that war also very openly. The third war started after 9/11. It was in 2003 that Taliban regrouped in Pakistan, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and others. And this war continued up till 2014. A new stage of war started in 2014, which is continuing up till this day. You see, this is very bad. When I criticize this policy, I criticize it as a Pakistani because I think it's bad for Pakistan. And why I say this is bad for Pakistan? First of all, geostrategic has eaten up into geoeconomic. You see, bilateral trade between Pakistan and Afghanistan has dramatically come down from almost $3 billion to a small fraction today. it is because of our policy or priority for Talibanization of the region rather than developing trade and economic cooperation between the two countries as equal sovereign countries. Similarly, this diversion of trade. Now, I am all for development of Chabahar, Gwadar, and I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think the region needs both these ports. And I think if there is a third or fourth port, I think that will also be required economically. But you see, this diversion in Afghanistan's trade became because of foolish policies followed by our state. You see, we blocked borders unilaterally. We blocked Afghan trade to the ocean. And Afghanistan had to divert this trade. You see, trade is like water. When you block one avenue, it opens up 5 other avenues. You see, in 1947, after the partition of India, in the first 3 years, Pakistan's biggest international trade partner was India. Both countries blocked the trade, but the trade continued in new avenues. It didn't stop. So the same will happen to Afghanistan. But you see, ultimately, Pakistan will be a loser. People of the Pakistan will be a loser. The third damage that Pakistan has in this policy is the loss of Central Asian access. You see, Pakistan could have access to Central Asian markets, and I think it would have been a bigger thing than CPEC for Pakistan. Pakistan wouldn't have to borrow money. It could have exported its goods. But because of our priorities, wrong priorities, we could not. And last but not the least damage done to Pakistan is by Talibanization. You see, if you support Taliban in Afghanistan, you have to have factories in Pakistan, producing Taliban. And those factories are polluting Pakistan's political and social atmosphere, creating law and order problems. You see, at one stage, 40% of Karachi was dominated by Taliban. Taliban were extorting money from Karachi market, as far away from Afghan borders. So look, you can imagine about Peshawar, you can imagine about other places. So it's bad for Pakistan. That's why I said we must change this policy. But before concluding, I also would like to say that there were two important opportunities of addressing Afghan conflict. The first was after Soviet withdrawal. At that time, unfortunately, many players had a reductionist approach. They said the moment Soviet troops withdraw, in many hours, Afghanistan will become normal. But that was not true. So Soviet Union withdrew, and unfortunately, a new war started, and Afghan urban centers saw destructions and death on a very large scale. But it was because of the indifference of international powers at that time and lack of consensus that Afghanistan suffered. And the world also suffered ultimately because Afghanistan became a hub of terrorism. The second opportunity was after during the Bonn process. I think the ideas that are generated now were the ideas that should have been focused upon at that time. I mean, that was time for reconciliation. Every insurgency ends with reconciliation. I'm all for it. But you see, at that time, it was ignored. Now it's being revived. I have very serious doubts that it will work now. I really have very serious doubts because as Pakistani, I know I have dealt with Taliban. My party was ruling party from 2008 to 2013 in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. And we talked to Taliban, we negotiated, we actually signed agreements. But none of the agreements stood its ground. You see, Pakistani state signed more than 12 agreements with Taliban. Every single agreement failed. So why would it succeed here? Because Taliban do not recognize modern state system. They can't really reconcile with constitution, with women's rights. They're still burning schools. They're still stoning women to death. They're still going for suicide bombings, and they're publicly claiming suicide bombing. And really, it will be incentivizing the terrorism by if you really don't scrutinize, don't make them accountable, and go ahead with the so-called reconciliation. So I think that will not be possible. But I think there are new things happening. China is a very important player, and I believe Chinese are very serious about peace in Afghanistan and peace in the region. It's in their own interest. So I think Chinese should also play a greater role, and US and other powers need to talk to Chinese in this regard. Russia has also entered the arena. As we are talking yesterday, a contingent of Russian army reached Pakistan for military exercises. And these exercises will continue during the week. So you see, this is the same Russian army which was supposed to be going to warm waters and for stopping it. A big war was fought here. So a few months back, one of our poets in Peshawar wrote a sarcastic couplet. He said, "Waqt sara badligi taqaze da waqt sara badligi taqaze da waqt nandal taki nave bayan shave di makhki America zamunga khpala wa us wai chi Rus Musalman shave di." It says, yes, requirements of the times change with passage of time. So we have a new edict, a new fatwa, which says America was our relative in the past, but now we have discovered that actually Russia has embraced Islam. So you see, in this situation, I think we need to have a new approach, and all these powers have to sort of work together instead of working as spoilers. I think it's time that we should give up this spoiler game. There's also one thing very important. Struggle for democracy in Pakistan is directly related to peace in the region. The democratic forces in Pakistan are in favor of good relations with Afghanistan and India. Mr. Nawaz Sharif's government, you see, was removed because he actually insisted that we should have good relations with India and we should have good relations with Afghanistan. We shouldn't intervene in Afghanistan. So democratic forces in Pakistan are in favor of non-interference in Afghanistan and have good economic relations with Afghanistan. That's actually the hope for the future. And I think anti-war sentiments are growing in Pakistan. Would you believe this? That last week we saw funerals in absentia for General Razak Achakzai in Peshawar, Quetta, and many other cities. Actually, General Achakzai was not a political leader, but these were sentiments against war, an unjust war. People want to bring this war to an end. So I think there is a growing sentiment against this war, and people would like, particularly young people in the western Pashtun districts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, have really started a movement against this war. Pashtun Tahaffuz movement is an anti-war movement which is asserting itself. The last thing that I would like to touch upon is the Daesh thing, because it is quoted as a new threat to the region. Now, I really do not know much about Daesh in the north of Afghanistan, but I have some idea about Daesh in the eastern Afghanistan. Daesh in eastern Afghanistan is really, they are the ideological cousins of Taliban. I think they are there because some people want Taliban look good. They actually take responsibilities for the dirty job that is done here in suicide bombing and attacking civilians. I know about 60 or 70% of Daesh in eastern Afghanistan, sitting in Achin, Nazian, and other places, actually they come from our area. Many of them are Taliban from our side of the border, operating in Afghanistan. They can't survive without supply lines behind them. So I think this is also very important to not use Daesh as something which should spoil an international and regional convergence about peace in Afghanistan. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Now, Ambassador Mukhopadhya.
Well, thank you, Barnet, for the introduction. Let me also start by expressing my admiration for the way the Herat Security Dialogue has grown in a very short period of time to the leading forum for discussions on Afghanistan in all its aspects in just a matter of 7 or 8 years, bringing together a depth of scholarship, experience, both administrative and diplomatic, and also political significance to Afghanistan. But let me not just end at that. Let me also add that this is perhaps the only security dialogue in the world that begins with Sufi music and is laced with Persian poetry of the highest order, that even a person who does not understand Persian can appreciate the beauty of the words. Beauty of words that were very well expressed by so many of our Afghan colleagues today, not least Dr. Spanta. So I would definitely also remark that Dr. Spanta and Dr. Davudian are not just conceptualizers of a strategic dialogue, but also flag bearers of the ancient traditions of culture of Herat. And again, we see that flying thanks to them today, and the world takes notice of Herat as a cultural capital. Since I'm the last speaker of the day, may I also take this opportunity to appreciate and congratulate all the panelists with a special word of applause for Afrasiab Khattak Sahab for his statement just before me, which was an extraordinarily wise statement that I can associate myself with fully. In case some of you are wondering whether somebody else is speaking in my name, if you've been going through the participants list, let me also assure you that I am not the imposter. The person in the photograph is the imposter. But if I exceed my time and I get corrected by Barnet, then of course it is the imposter who's speaking. So let me also join Barnet, Mr. Khattak, as well as Javed in pointing out, I think, some of the weaknesses of the brief and the scope of this panel. I do not want to let Pakistan off the hook for its responsibility for the situation in Afghanistan, but India-Pakistan issues are not the key issues in the in the current situation of Pakistan. I could list out at least 12 reasons why this is not so and why such an approach is faulty. But if I spent my time doing that, I would not really be addressing what I think could be called the constructive part of this intervention. So just for the record, I take the permission of the chair and the organizers to submit some of those reservations in writing, because this is the whole idea that somehow Afghanistan is a byproduct of India-Pakistan rivalries and not a product of the Pakistani state itself is a very insidious idea that has actually grown over the last 15, 20 years post-Taliban. It's a very ahistorical idea. It's a post-colonial idea and it's a post-Taliban idea. It did not exist here during the Zahir Shah years. It did not exist in the Dawood years. It did not exist during the Mujahideen struggle or the period of Mujahideen rule or even the Taliban. It started when Pakistan actually began losing the plot. And those who end up pleading for a kind of linkage between India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan on these issues forget that there are India-Pakistan issues that we have to try and resolve bilaterally. There are Afghanistan-Pakistan issues that we have to resolve bilaterally. Since 1947, when India and Pakistan attained, we had partition and we attained independence, we've had 4 official wars, 1948, 1965, 1971, and then the Kargil War. Afghanistan was never a factor. In the tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan, starting with the non-recognition of Pakistan in 1947, but later on during the Dawood years and then the Najib years, and even during the Taliban, no resolution to the Durand Line issue. The fact is that the Durand Line is a bilateral issue in which India has played no part. And at no stage in any of these issues have Afghanistan and India joined hands against Pakistan. So I think this whole sort of propaganda point is something that needs to be laid at rest once and for all. And for those who plead any linkage between the two, in effect, you end up rationalizing or justifying the recourse to terrorism by Pakistan for a bilateral problem exported to a third country, which is not acceptable either in international law or any morality. So I think I just want to leave that aside and then really come to what I think are 2 or 3, and just to complete that point. And so ultimately what we come down to is that the problems really lie in the Pakistani state. The problem lies in the insecurity of the Pakistani state, which fears Pashtun nationalism on its west, covets Kashmir on its east, and is envious or worse about India's strength in terms of size, demography, economy, technology, and other areas, and is not able to address that by conventional means of any sort. So I think this is the core problem when it comes to this. But, you know, as I said, India-Pakistan problems, Afghanistan-Pakistan problems are not the only problems that beset Afghanistan. We have a US-Russia rivalry that had abated for a few years, but that has resurfaced once again with a possible degree of virulence. You have US-Iran rivalry, and I think one speaker did mention about how this had been temporarily muted by the JCPOA, I think it was Christine Fair, but that once again has risen because of President Trump's policies. You have Sunni extremism and Shia reaction that is also a problem that afflicts Afghanistan, but fortunately Afghanistan has not got into that cycle or schism or that cycle of violence that it has created elsewhere. So you have several other problems, and as other speakers have also said, any grand bargain that talks about just 2 or 3 countries is not going to resolve the larger problem. Now, is it possible to have a grand bargain that takes care of all the countries together? Very unlikely. So let's just go through them one by one. India-Pakistan issues, well, we've been talking about them, sometimes not talking about them. I don't see any resolution, any grand bargain on India-Pakistan issues soon. Afghanistan-Pakistan issues, once again, I don't see a resolution to the main problem, Durand Line. But both India and India and Afghanistan have a problem with Pakistan on terrorism. I don't see a resolution to the problem of terrorism exported from Pakistan to either India or Afghanistan. And I think for that, I don't think Pakistan is ready for any grand coalition, grand bargain, short of effective control of Afghanistan as a client state. And I don't see Afghanistan accepting that. So amongst these 3 countries, we do not see any bilateral or trilateral grand bargain. Do we see any grand bargain amongst the other participants? US, Russia, the minimum condition that is required is a political resolution to the US-Russia rivalry. Does anyone of you see that in the horizon? Unlikely. US-Iran, very unlikely. Shia-Sunni, not visible, not least in the current context of a kind of toxic policies being followed by certain countries in West Asia once again. So if we look at this and scratch the barrel and look for a creative opportunity, I think there is one creative opportunity, however unrealistic it may look in the short run, and that lies, and I think again Dr. Fair raised this point, lies in the economy. The reality is that Afghanistan sits on at least an estimated US estimate of $3 trillion in terms of natural resources, largely unexploited. In the conversation on natural resources, I think people forget that Afghanistan is also a land of great agricultural resource. Its products, its agricultural products, all organic, its horticultural products are highly valued for themselves. And so between a kind of investment in the natural resources sector, which generates revenue, which could create the basis for a viable economic viability of the Afghan state, and an investment in the agriculture, livestock, horticulture, and allied sectors, an investment in the livelihood sector that gives people livelihoods and improves their income levels and earnings, adds value to their products, creates employment, generates entrepreneurship, and generally raises the level of the economy. I think there are tremendous opportunities. In the natural resources sector, I would say that it is not adequate to invest only in extraction. It is very, very important that Afghanistan devises, maybe it already has, devised a policy which involves value adding beneficiation, adding value and processing both the products of its natural resources as well as its agri-sector. So processing should be the buzzword for Afghanistan. Processing, natural resources, and primary products. And the issue of security will come up, but someone somewhere has to build the chicken and egg question. And I believe that at the time of the US drawdown in 2014, India had the foresight, I would say, to organize the first international summit on investment in Afghanistan in Delhi. That may have been lost in the negative news of that time. But perhaps the time has come, and once again to pick up or echo something that was said by Dr. Fair, perhaps the time has come to once again talk about a grand bargain around the Afghan economy and bring in the United States, China, India, Iran, Russia, Pakistan, and all its Central Asian neighbors in seeing who can add more value to the primary products and the natural resources of Afghanistan. And if we did that, then perhaps we would be able to reverse the logic between security and development and security and investment. And perhaps some part of this international investment needs to be made in the security for investments, not just the security of other things. So I think, these are the points that I wanted to make. And in this, in many ways, and I would again echo something that Dr. Ludin, Ambassador Ludin said, which was the Heart of Asia process. The Heart of Asia process was perhaps the only process that actually was Afghan-owned and Afghan-led, and that had also all the regional neighbors involved. But it had, in retrospect, and since we were both in many ways very closely involved in it, in retrospect, it had one missing element. The absence of the United States in some ways weakened that process. Because in effect, perhaps one of the most key players was absent from that process. So can we think of a diplomatic initiative that combines the essential features of the Heart of Asia process, but brings in the whole idea of investing in the Afghan economy? And I'm sorry if I sounded pessimistic about all the other political issues, but this is the only area where I see the possibility of a grand bargain. Not everyone may benefit equally. There may be some losers, some winners, and maybe some spoilers, but at least this is the only direction that I see of a grand bargain. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I believe it was President Ronald Reagan who said that when someone showed him a barn full of horse manure, they might say that it looks pretty bad condition, but he would say, I know there's got to be a pony in there somewhere. And perhaps that pony is called the economy, or it's called China. So just one or two words. The rise of China, in addition to India, changes the incentives for everyone in the region. And we haven't talked about other diplomatic formats that are now being tried. The Moscow process, the SCO contact group, and so on. And perhaps, just as we don't need to see Chabahar and Belt and Road and so on as rivals, maybe we can figure out a way that those various initiatives can complement each other as well. With that said, let me open the floor. Now, we have 20 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take one question, and then I'll ask for more questions on that same topic, two more, and then I'll go around another round. Let me ask Professor Gao from China.
Thank you. I would like to be very glad because actually I was ignored in the morning for 3 times. So I have the chance now. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Rising China, okay? I'm from China, from Shanghai Academy of Global Governance and Area Studies. I'd like to make some comments instead of being a question upon this session. Frankly, I'm deeply touched by this session because I see it's a very good harbinger of cooperation, a very possible future of South Asia. Obviously, our political consensus was frequently mentioned by the 3 speakers. What I'm going to say is that I quite agree that Asia, on the first place, is Asians Asia. And so much common we have to stand, and so much future we want to share in the future. What I'm going to say is that have a look at what the outside players have done in the past. passage of history to Asians. I think one point I'm going to point out is that we do have much common experience, at least for one point. We're suffering from colonization. All the countries, probably India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and about we, China. So we know what does that mean, the history of sorrow, pity, fatigue, torturing time. We survived and we step into the 21st century. It's really a blessing for us. So how about have a look at all the problems here? You talk about the Chabaha problem. I want to make some response about that. The female professor from America, she mentioned America is a declining power. Personally, I agree with it very much. But I don't think America should be a disappearing power. What I'm beginning to say is that, something like let me have a look at. Point is, I'm sorry about the situation of Afghanistan now, but we should think about who made Afghanistan into such a chaotic problem or messy problem. I think America should at least take some special responsibility for that. Something like you adopt a child from the age of 5, then at the age of 10, because you have some slight problem with your political system, or you have a lovely president, then you say, I'm not going to give on, I'm going to give up. Somebody else will take care of you. This is not a logic we should appreciate. So I agree that cooperation is much more important than conflicts. Actually, as a professor talked about, Chabaha should not be a choice for Afghanistan because you will never put your money into your enemy's pocket. Personally, I think this is a very unacceptable logic for us because we say common interest, common ground, and common future. That is why China would probably benefit a lot for the past 30 years because we served the developed countries, and the developed countries, the middle class enjoyed a lot from our Chinese hard working for so many years, and we made the slightest and modest money from that. So we served them and we growed. This is a mutual benefit instead of being kind of Cold War ideology. So what I'm going to say is that last is, I agree with the Indian diplomat. They talk about so many conflicts seems hard to resolve. But I'm going to say, as you mentioned, at least we could go little by little, trickle into Tamans into the river. And all the problems in the world would have the solution sooner or later. Recently, the Japan's Prime Minister Abe is going to visit China. If you look at history, look at the recent time, you know that we have up and down experience with Japan. But I think we would have a promising future because time will give us the opportunity sooner or later. So what I'm going to say last is that I think we should think in our own way as Asians. We are different by tradition and culture from our Western friends. But when the time comes, we will do that in a very approachable, natural, and mutual benefit way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me see it. This gentleman here. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Muhammad Natiki. I have one question from Excellency Mr. Afrasiab Khattak. I know you too much critics from your government, but my question from Your Excellency, from you, my question that is, what want Pakistan from Afghanistan? You fear from Indonesian of Afghanistan. You want to return the Taliban Emirat to Afghanistan, Emirat of Taliban back to Afghanistan again? Or you want Afghanistan recognize Doiran line? Please tell us clearly.
And then the woman behind him.
Hello, my name is Farkhunda. My question is addressing to Mr. Ludin Saib. I wanted to ask about your phrase, beyond Pakistan. where should we move when Quetta Shora and Peshawar Shora is in Pakistan? Where should we go? Thank you.
Okay. Now, I'm trying to remember the previous sessions. I guess they took all the questions, and then, okay, so let's go ahead with that model as well. Now, over here, yes, Paolo.
ما یک سوال کوتاه از جناب دوست خود آقای خطک دارم از پروفسورم دارم. آقای خطک مونږ څه وکړو چې پاکستان له مونږ لاس په سر سي پاکستان له مونږ څه غواړي تاسو په اختیار چې هغه پاکستان ته ورکو چې نور غلی سي یعنی آخرین خبره از پروفسور صاحب یک پرسان دارم امریکا با همین بزرگی خود میدانه که پاکستان در امور افغانستان مداخله میکنه میفهمه که تروریستا اونجا هسته میفهمه که پاکستان حامی تروریست است امریکا خود دموکرات هم میگیره همین فشاری که به پاکستان آورده می کفایت میکنه یا امریکا هم رفیق پاکستان است در این قضیه
David? Yes. Well, I'm sorry, I have two very insistent people here. I saw David first, then I'll go to Paulo. David.
Thank you so much. Interesting panel, lots of things to disagree and lots of things to agree. I want to make only two quick points. First of all, Javad Ludin, ceasefire is a necessary and not a sufficient condition for peace, but is necessary. We need to have ceasefire and then discuss, or together with that, discuss what can be done, how to reconstruct the unity of the territory of Afghanistan. But we cannot say we want peace and keep fighting. That's something which will not go on. Second point, Afrasiab. Daesh and the Taliban are not the same. Of course, people can shift from one side to the other one. If you talk with Taliban, you know that they don't like Daesh at all. But nevertheless, transition between the Taliban and Daesh is possible, of course. We want to avoid that. And in order to avoid that, we need to strengthen the position inside the Taliban that separate themselves from Daesh. The alternative is to create a situation of chaos. Someone was saying a black hole. I'm a physicist, black hole is a different thing. But chaos can be spread inside Afghanistan. I think it was Javad. And then we don't want to have that. We don't want to have a situation where chaos is in Afghanistan, spread more, and then spread outside. The danger is very serious. We have a very interesting region here, South Asia, which unfortunately has also nuclear weapons. So we have to be careful about the consequence of stimulating conflicts around. So in conclusion, I think we have to, there is not an infinite amount of time. Time is running short. The sooner we can create a peace agreement in this country, the better it will be for everybody in the region. That's the main point. And I think it's not impossible to reach that, but we need to have a little bit of flexibility on all sides.
Thank you. Okay, David.
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank Professor Gao for his, Dr. Gao for his comments, and I also want to thank Dr. Muradian for having such a strong Chinese delegation. I mean, if you look at the list of participants, and I urge everybody to, you will see the country outside of Afghanistan that has the most participants here, I believe, if I've counted correctly, is China. And I think that's a great thing. The one problem I would have, and Dr. Gao mentioned it, that the Chinese didn't have a speaking role, and I can see that they were a little bit unhappy with that. So maybe next time we can make sure we have a speaking role for our Chinese guests so they are not so unhappy, because China is a rising power. And that is the real point that I wanted to make. There has been a lot of commentary here, and I'm going to say that I think it's actually quite incorrect, talking about the decline of the United States. I think Professor Rubin actually made it correct when he inserted the word relative, but people don't hear the relative, they hear the decline. And in fact, if you look at every estimate of national power, including the military one, where the United States is still by far the largest, but also economically, the United States is not only not declining, it's increasing. What's happening is other countries, China most especially, but in recent years, India and other places are progressing more quickly. The relative standing of the United States is not as paramount as it was before. But anyone, any strategist, any commentator who thinks that the United States is actually declining is making a huge mistake. It's really, I think, a big strategic mistake. So since I've heard that so often, and anyone who wants to talk about statistics or there's many people smarter than I have written books about this, I can do that. And I do think it's important to look at the record of how countries have done when they have helped other countries. And the United States, of course, did a lot with South Korea. Other countries worked with North Korea, and I can tell you where I'd rather live. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful panel. I really enjoyed all the discussions. My question goes to Ludin sir. I'm glad the term is used as peace process and not just, an event that just happens. And I hope that this would mean that this is not going to be a rushed process or an exit strategy for the US or for other international allies of Afghanistan. Mentioning that, I wanted to ask, it's welcome that the US has taken the initiative, but for a sustainable and durable peace in Afghanistan, to what extent you see a role for international players, beginning from the United Nations to the rest of the countries, international allies, NATO, and the rest of the countries in the region? And it was mentioned, Russia, Iran, China. To what extent do you see the role for them in a legitimate peace that would be accepted by everyone and everyone would be happy about it, so that, once and for all, we would be done with conflicts and it wouldn't be the start of another, discussions or matters that would be contested. And when do you see that happening? I know at this point it's all talks, we're just all talking about it and speculating, but in an ideal scenario, where do you see that happening and how do you see the value in it? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take 3 more questions of people who looked at me with very great determination. Okay, 4. And then that will be the end. So first, this gentleman in the far rear. Even if I know him, I can't see his face clearly enough to identify him.
سلام مجدد خدمت همه عزیزا. اسدالله یوسفی هستم، دانشجوی سال 4 حقوق علوم سیاسی دانشگاه جامی. من 2 سوال دارم، یکی از جناب آقای خطک و یکی از جناب آقای لودین. از جناب آقای خطک می‌خواستم بپرسم که به نظر شما خیلی آرمانی نیست که ما فکر کنیم که باید در طول این سالها پاکستان روی موضوعات اقتصادی با آسیای میانه و افغانستان بیشتر توجه میکنه تا این که از طالبان و گروه‌های تروریستی حمایت بکنه. یعنی به نظر شما منطقی هست در حال حاضر که چنین چیز اتفاق بیفته؟ که سوال من که از جناب آقای لودین این هست که شما مدت زیادی در وزارت خارجه کار کردین، ولی به نظر شما سیاست خارجی افغانستان و دیپلماسی افغانستان به حد زیادتر محتاطانه نبوده نسبت به مسائل سیاسی و مسائل استراتژی افغانستان نسبت به هم منطقه و هم کشورهای اروپایی و به خصوص کشور آمریکا؟ یعنی چرا دلیلش چیست که همیشه وقتی ما وارد دیپلماسی میشه واسه گفتگو میشیم با جانب مقابل، همیشه ما در واقع بازنده هستیم و او نتیجه مطلوبه که میخوایم نمیگیریم؟ خیلی ممنون.
Okay, so let me just identify the people I'm going to take. The lady here, Nazif Sharani, and Minister Osmani, please.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. من 2 سوال دارم. سوال اول متوجه هر 3 پنلیست که در این پنل ما و شما بحث داشتیم روابط افغانستان و پاکستان. در جریان بیش از 1.5 دهه گذشته رفت و آمدهای زیادی میان حکومت افغانستان و دولت پاکستان اتفاق افتاد. مقامات بلندپایه از هر 2 دولت، ملاقات‌های سران هر 2 دولت را ما شاهد بودیم، ولی هیچگاه ما شاهد تغییر جدی در رویکرد پاکستان نسبت به افغانستان نبودیم. آیا با تجربه ناکام دوره‌های گذشته شما شاهد موارد متفاوت تر از گذشته در روابط افغانستان و پاکستان هستید. ما باورم است که متاسفانه هنوز ما شاهد هیچ نوع تغییراتی در روابط افغانستان و پاکستان نیستیم. اگر چنین مواردی وجود داشته باشه کدام موارده؟ سوال دوم اینه که بر همگان روشنه که طالبان و ناامنی در افغانستان من حیث یکی از ابزارهای سیاست خارجی پاکستان به کار گرفته شده. امروز طالبان به عنوان مهره‌های ناکارآمد در پیشبرد سیاست خارجی پاکستان تلقی شده و به این خاطر چهره‌های است که تبدیل شده به چهره‌های ناکارآمد توسط طالبان، چهره عوض کردن به نام قماندانان داعش در بعضی از نقاط افغانستان، در ننگرهار و در غزنی ما شاهد هستیم که بقایای گذشته طالبان یا قماندان گذشته طالبان تحت پرچم داعش فعالیت میکنه. این نشان از ایه که هنوز هم ناامنی و بی‌ثباتی در افغانستان به حیث یکی از بخشی از سیاست خارجی افغانستان یکی از ابزارهای کارآمد پاکستان بر علیه افغانستانه. آیا شما معتقد هستین که در ماه‌ها یا حداقل 6 ماه آینده با توجه به تحولاتی که در مورد صلح افغانستان اتفاق افتاده این رویکرد پاکستان تغییر کنه؟ تشکر.
Thank you. Two very brief questions. Ambassador Mukhopadhya, I appreciate your optimism about the possibility of economy becoming the center for some kind of positive change. Unfortunately, the current the government structure in Kabul has wasted a lot of those opportunities. Do you think if the government continues in the structure that it is currently, would that optimism be realistic? The second question I have is to Ambassador Ludin and Senator Khattak. Ambassador Ludin is saying essentially that discussion of Durand line is a taboo in Afghanistan. Nobody can touch that issue, and a lot of us who are sitting in this room are also aware of that. And that Kabul has been talking, really speaking for Pashtuns on the other side of the Durand line, as it were. I would love to hear from Senator Khattak whether that's an acceptable position that Kabul should be speaking for the Pashtun community on the other side within Pakistan, or do you have your own voice and your own stance on this situation?
علی احمد عثمانیان، در بحث روابط با پاکستان ما ممکنه وقتی بیشتر به نتیجه برسیم که ببینیم از تخریب رابطه با پاکستان کی نفع میبره کی ضرر میکنه در هر دو طرف. در طرف پاکستان کسایی که این موضوعات پیش میبرن علیه افغانستان خود اشاره کردین آی جنرال های نظامی بعضی از سیاستمداران و بعضی از اعضای دولت، نه همه اینها. این که جنرال ها و آی چی میخواین، خب اونا آقای خطک اونا حتما تشریح میکنن. سیاستمدارها چون ما با اونا ارتباط داشتیم میخوان که از حمایت نظامی جنرال ها و آی برخوردار باشن، به این دلیل این بحث رو ادامه میدن. دیگه کسایی که هستن بعضی مراجع دینی تندرو با توجه به این تندروی از منابع استفاده میکنن. مافیای در طرف افغانستان برخی از تحلیلگرای جامعه مدنی هن. ما ابتدا یک ذهنیتی آمدیم ساختیم اینجا که پاکستان دشمنمونه و تجزیه نکردیم کدام بخش از پاکستان با ما مشکلات داره یا با جامعه ما مشکلات داره. گفته مرگ بر پاکستان، دیگه نگفته مرگ بر کجای پاکستان، کی است که مخالفت میکنه. در اونجا مافیا هست، جنرالای هست، آی هست، یا تمام پاکستان یا تمام مردم پاکستان. و این ما رو به اشتباه انداخته که هر فرد پاکستانی رو وقتی دیدیم همه برخورد داشتیم. ما این ذهنیت که اینجا ساخته شده با استفاده از این ذهنیت برخی در طرف ما هم از این استفاده کردن. عده‌ای که در تامین امنیت شکست خوردن خواستن خود قهرمان به یک شکل دیگه نشان بدن. عده‌ای از تحلیلگرای جامعه مدنی ما خواستن با شدت در این قضیه خود قهرمان نشان بدن. حتی نمایندگان شورای پارلمان از این شورای ملی از این موضوع استفاده کردن. کیها ضرر کردن؟ جامعه ما در دو طرف ضرر کرده از این قضیه. تجارت ضرر کرده، ترانزیت ضرر کرده. خب حال ما برای که به نتیجه برسیم یکی تجزیه کردنه که کی در اون طرف این مسائل فاجعه بار در هر دو طرف پیش میبرن به نفع کدام است. اونایی که ضرر کردن ما به یک بحث نیاز داریم، به تعداد در هر فن به یک عده دیگراندیش. در سیاست به دیگراندیش‌های نیاز داریم که واقعیت‌ها و مشکلات طرف ما را بیان کنه. مثل که آقای افراسیاب خطک به عنوان یک دیگراندیش سیاسی مشکلات او طرف را بیان کردن. دیگه به رسانه‌های دیگراندیش نیاز داریم، جامعه دینی دیگراندیش نیاز داریم که واقعیت‌ها در هر دو طرف بیان کنه. وقتی ما واقعیت‌ها و ریشه‌های درست در شناختیم میتونیم که جلو کسایی که همین تخریب رابطه ما با پاکستان به ضرر از اونها جلو از اونها بگیریم و بتونیم که موضوعات بهتر تحلیل کنیم و ابتدا از همین بحث شروع کنیم که سیاستمدارا با هم بشینن و اهل رسانه و اعضای تکنیکی. ما به یک مأموریت بسیار کوتاه اشاره میکنم. سال 2015 وقتی که ما وزارت انرژی و آب آمدیم، ما یک مأموریت داشتیم همراه با خواجه آصف که یکی از افراد سیاسی پاکستان، وزیر دفاع پاکستان و وزیر انرژی بود. هر دو سه ماه یک بار یا 4 5 ماه یک بار ما با هم ملاقات داشتیم تا مأموریت کاسای غذا رو به نتیجه برسانیم. اونجا شاهد بودیم که هر موضوعگیری که ما در رابطه با کاسای غذا میکردیم غالبا اونا از ما حمایت میکردن با این الفاظ که ما صحبت برادرای افغانی خود را تایید میکنیم. در همین بخش بالاخره در سال گذشته مأموریت مشترک به نتیجه رسید. به این معنی که در او طرف هم بعضی از تمایلات وجود داره، با وجودی که وقتی وزیر خارجه شد میدیدم که بعضی بحث‌های اختلافی بین دو کشور چی میکنه. ما بعضی مأموریت‌های مشترک میتونیم به خصوص در بخش ترانزیت، در بخش تجارت تعریف کنیم و از این بپردازیم به نزدیکی بین دو طرف. تشکر.
Thank you. Now, let me go in the opposite order from, by which people spoke. Start with Ambassador Mukhopadhya. Yeah. No, they don't. It's not.
Thank you. Since luckily there are not too many questions from me, so let me take advantage of this opportunity to just mention 3 points that I missed out. I talked about rivalries. I actually forgot to mention a new and incipient rivalry between US and China, not perhaps reflected in Afghanistan at the moment, but on a wider level, which could perhaps even impact on the region. The second is that in the context of investment, I appreciate the point that was made by Dr. Najib Shahrani, that perhaps it seemed a little optimistic, but I should be clear. My point was that I was actually pessimistic about anything else, and this was the only area that gave a glimmer of hope. That's very different from optimism, and that it, of course, requires a lot of effort. But I forgot to mention one very important development in the last 3 years, 5 years that I have left Afghanistan, which is that in these 5 years, there have been extraordinary developments in connectivity of Afghanistan. So in terms of natural resources exploitation, beneficiation, value adding, evacuation, you have the Chabahar, which is developing, and I agree once again that we need to, China and India perhaps need to think of solutions to keep the viability of the Chabahar project, maybe linked with the Uzbekistan rail line that we discussed in the morning. The second is the Lapis Lazuli corridor, again an entirely new development until totally unforeseen at that time. The Tapi gas pipeline actually inaugurated. The Casa 1000 still making progress. The international north-south corridor that is going on. And for whatever advantages it can offer, some of the projects under the BRI going through Central Asia. We have reservations on the CPEC for reasons of sovereignty and territorial integrity, which may be well known to many of you. But at least there are a number of connectivity initiatives that can connect. Now, then I turn to the question on the structure. Now, very often, of course, you know, the structure of a system also follows the objectives. And if you had the objectives right, then you would have the structures that follow. So if your objective then becomes, all right, how do we convert Afghanistan into a theater of cooperation on the economy through investments in natural resources and primary products in the agriculture and allied sector, we would think of developing the structures for that. And even in the international plane, Barnet and I were just in Delhi 3 days back in perhaps a very rare India, US, China, of course unofficial in the case of US and perhaps semi-official in the case of China and India, discussing the possibilities of cooperation for Afghanistan. And we found our Chinese colleagues very open to the idea of cooperation, not limited to soft sectors like training, which is where we have begun for the time being, but also open to other ideas going, including as far as security. So, you know, I think there are some positive trends. Final question, just a kind of remark on Madam Rizai's question. I have always felt for a long time that as far as Afghanistan is concerned,
There are things that Afghanistan can do nothing about, and there are things that it can do something about. Afghanistan can do nothing about Pakistan and Pakistan's policy, and I don't think there is much hope for change there. Afghanistan cannot do much about the Taliban. It's outside their hands, but they should keep trying as they are. Afghanistan, the only thing that did I mention Afghanistan cannot do much about US policy. If the US decides to stay the course, well and good. If it decides to draw down or withdraw or just walk out one day, there's not much Afghanistan can do. But there is one thing that Afghanistan can do, which is to preserve its internal cohesion and unity. And if this one thing goes, then everything else will prey upon those cleavages, fractures, disunity, and lack of cohesion. So this is the one factor that whether Afghanistan has the money or the weapons or the equipment or not, it's a political decision that the Afghans can take care of. So if they focused and concentrated their energies on this, I think a lot else would follow. Thank you.
Here, that's to Javed.
خواهر ما فرخنده جان یک سوال کرد اما چون به انگلیسی سوال کرد میشه به انگلیسی جواب بدم حتما میخواین. The question was about the post-Pakistan paradigm and where what about Quetta Shura and all that, and I think what I basically was saying was not to diminish the fact that Pakistan still remains the number one factor behind insecurity in Afghanistan, and there's absolutely no dispute. We've discussed it in this panel today as well. What I think is more that as a trend, we must be aware that there are new factors that are coming into play. We are seeing the and even if you take the Taliban itself, and that's the one example I mentioned, but for lack of time, I didn't discuss some of the other factors as well. Daesh was the other factor that has come into play, which Senator Saab mentioned. Even if Pakistan stopped this, the question is, well, the fact that the region, you see the whole of the Middle East and you have dynamics of conflict in the rest of the region, will that mean that Afghanistan will be immune from other factors of instability? No, we won't be. So that's why I think we need to really be aware of that, because in the last 17 years, we have really focused, and for the right reasons, because we did not have other instruments of whether it was instruments of basically defending ourselves. We engaged in advocacy in relation to Pakistan's role in Afghanistan's insecurity. So we lobbied the US, we lobbied the Western world, we lobbied in the region and focused exactly on Pakistan, and I think we have done a good job of that. Now, we really need to move beyond that and actually think about wider dynamics. But that is not to say that Quetta Shura is still there in Quetta and that they still remain the number one, as I said, the number one factor of instability. The question about ceasefire, there are certain things that, you know, basically they don't need to be even said. The fact that they go without saying, like the fact that ceasefire is an important, a very essential step is there, and that's why the peace process will have to work towards. And I think one of the things I'm hearing about the strategy of the current discussions is that if the Taliban are talking about the troop presence issue in Afghanistan, I would assume that Ambassador Khalilzad in his discussions will be talking primarily about ceasefire as a precondition, or as a, if not a precondition, as the first step. So, but Paulo, I think it's you know, it's sometimes it's important to really not be just too absorbed by limited goals. We had I really have an issue sometimes with people just being too focused on settlement with the Taliban. Settlement is not the end state. Maybe for some of us in this hall, and certainly the ones that are involved from the outside world, maybe a settlement is a good administrative goal for a process. But for us Afghans, we will have to live in this country. So for us, the end state is important, not whatever the settlement. The settlement, the ceasefire, doesn't help anything. We had a ceasefire over Eid. A lot of you all celebrated it. Frankly, I was always skeptical. I think we just shortly, wasn't it after this Eid ceasefire, when we had the worst attacks in Dasht-e-Barchi, when we had Ghazni taken over by the Taliban. So what a ceasefire serves is nothing, unless it's followed quickly by a focus on establishing a durable end state that's peaceful. Sonia John Iqbal asked a question about the role of regional countries. I think that's the emphasis on the US, again, does not exclude the fact that regional countries are very crucially involved. Pakistan obviously still retains a major influence. They were the ones that released the Taliban leaders very recently, in very recent days, in response to US request. So they will continue to be involved, and I think they're good. What I earlier a little complained about was really as an Afghan, I thought it was quite an interesting thing that we asked them for years for the same thing, which was release of Mullah Baradar, and it didn't happen, and then the US asked them, and then it happened at once. But other countries are also involved. I think we're going to have a conference in Moscow very soon. Russia obviously has a major role, and so have others, countries in Central Asia. Arab countries have a major stake in this, and there are obviously discussions taking place there. What will be very important is that all these fractured, from our point of view, as I think with all these various initiatives, if they go their own way, there is a risk that we will have a fractured approach, and they will cancel each other out rather than reinforce each other. In a way, I think the role of the region should be more than just the role of like by way of giving a favor to Afghanistan or helping Afghanistan. It is fundamentally connected to their security as well. At the end of the day, Afghanistan is suffering from insecurity that comes from the region, and then we, in our own turn, we feed it back to them. So I think the fear that exists in Central Asia and Russia, for example, is very understandable. It is about their security, but they have to say it that way, rather than making it look like they're doing us a favor by facilitating peace talks. They should know that they're actually helping their own security.
Can you wrap up?
And I think I'll just wrap up. I think the question of the Duran line by Professor Shahrani was more for you rather than for me. And on the question of, I think Rtrd just said, and Mr. Mukhopadhya addressed, سوالتان در مورد جناب وکیل صاحب در مورد پاکستان و این که کدام تاثیر بالاخره خود داشته باشه، تا حالا خود نداشته. یعنی ما واضح من پیشترم در صحبتهای خود گفتم که در ما اگر یک ابتکار یا یک بخش از سیاست خارجی یا از ابتکار دیپلماتیک که ما در 17 سال مستمر و جدی همیشه تعقیب کردیم، اگرچه زیر انتقاد هم آمده، این موضوع پاکستان بوده. اما در وقت هم نتیجه نداد به دلایل مختلفش، به خاطر که بسیار پیچیده بود و حال هم در دوره حکومت وحدت ملی هم نتیجه نداد و امروز در یک وضعیت ناکام قرار داریم. اما رهبری ایالات متحده آمریکا امروز در پروسه صلح که حال سفیر صاحب خلیلزاد آمدن و این رهبری میکنن، معلوم میشه که اثراتش امیر رهایی رهبرای طالبان که اینا در چند روز گذشته ما میبینیم، شاید نشاندهی از این بکنه که پاکستان در که یک پروسه که رهبریش افغان‌ها به عهده داشته باشن کمک نکرد، اما در یک پروسه که امریکایی‌ها رهبریش داشته باشن اونا کمک میکنن. در هر صورت ما کدام گفته است، کدام ضرب المثل است که میگم ما سه کار داریم، خدا کنه که از هر چیز باشه، ما صلح کار داریم، خدا کنه که امریکا بر ما بده یا پاکستان.
Afrasiab.
Thank you. I shall try to be very brief because it has been a long session. I think I can group the questions. Many questions, at least two questions. What does Pakistan want? What is its aim in supporting Taliban, etc.? I think Pakistan's policy, as I earlier pointed out, it started from 1980s. It has been one policy all the time. You see, when General Ziaul Haq said in 1980 that there are no Afghan refugees because they are refugees as muhajir in the sense of Islamic history, and we are ansars, the hosts, referring to the great pilgrimage in Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon him, life. You see, that was a subtle way of saying that there are no two countries. There is only one country, Islamic country, and that country obviously was Pakistan. So the policy started right from Ziaul Haq. It crystallized in 1990s, 94 particularly, with the creation of Taliban. Because when Taliban entered Afghanistan in 1996, 26th of September, what did they do in Kabul? What were the 5 or 6 major things that they do? They banned Afghan national flag. They banned Afghan national anthem. Radio Kabul was renamed as Voice of Sharia. It was not Radio Islamabad. It was not Radio Tehran. It was Radio Kabul that was renamed as Voice of Sharia. Nowruz, 5,000-year-old festival, was banned. Jirga, the most essential Pashtun social institution, was banned. They said there are no jirgas in Sharia. They murdered Dr. Najibullah, who stood for peace and reconciliation and who was living in UN compound, not a fighter from any side, but they killed him. They demolished Buddha statue. Everything that represented Afghaniyat, Afghanhood, was attacked. And it was not a coincidence. They were programmed for it. So I believe that they're still implementing that program, which is strategic depth in Afghanistan. And we, as Pakistanis, believe that this is a very misguided policy. And it has to change. It will change. I'm sure it will change because it has no future. You see, if, God forbid, Afghanistan's crisis deepens, the debris will fall on Pakistan. The debris will fall on the whole region. The region can't afford it. Pakistan can't afford it. I think the agreements between Pakistan and Afghanistan in 2014, when President Ashraf Ghani visited Islamabad, 48 MOUs, Memorandums of Understanding, are most important. And both countries will have to turn back to that. Our plea is that we need close relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan as two sovereign countries, as two brotherly countries respecting each other's sovereignty and political sort of life. And you see, in 2015, when President Ashraf Ghani was reluctant to come to Islamabad for Heart of Asia conference, we Pakistani politicians, we came in a delegation. We met President Ashraf Ghani. We met Chief Executive Dr. Abdullah. We met Mr. Yunus Kanuni. We met the former President Hamid Karzai Sahab. We met Syed Ahmad Gilani Sahab. We met many leaders. And we requested them to persuade the President to visit Islamabad because we thought the President said Pakistan has not fulfilled its promises. We said, fair, you are absolutely right, but you should say the same thing in Islamabad. You should please come to Islamabad because the process should continue. And he and other Afghan politicians were very gracious to accept our request, which shows that diplomacy and politics works. Why shouldn't we adopt these means instead of sending Taliban and conquering Afghanistan through Taliban? Why can't we talk to Afghans? Why can't we engage them in a political manner? So I think this is a very viable alternative. We are not saying that idealistic. One of our Iranian friends was asking me, is it idealistic to say that Pakistan will have good relations? You see, Germany and France, Germany and Poland, you see, they had fought so many wars, they were enemies, but they are not anymore enemies. The neighbors can't remain to be perpetual enemies. So I believe it is possible. It's not idealistic. It's a practical thing for both the countries. They will, and God forbid, if they don't learn lessons, they will swim or sink together. They will have the same destiny. It's not just one country will be burning and the other country will be sort of looking just a spectator. Well, talking about Pashtuns in Pakistan, we sort of believe that, for example, my party, I can speak for ANP, Awami National Party, issued an Afghan policy in 2005, 14 points policy. It said that yes, we recognize these two countries, Pakistan and Afghanistan, and they should have the best of relations. The only thing that we demanded was opening the borders for trade, for cultural relations, from people-to-people relations, and we are not alone in this. I mean, we have several differences with Mr. Imran Khan. We really have grave reservations about the type of election which brought him into power. But even then, when he came into power, in first speech, he said we should have open borders with Afghanistan. It is the present Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan. So this type of relationship is not, this demand is not confined just to Pashtuns. There are others who also say this, that we should have open borders. Well, they might have differences at the different line. In many countries, they have these colonial legacies of problems, but these are not the type of problem that should make them fight. I think if through cooperation, they can overcome these problems and they can look for a peaceful resolution. So I don't think that's a real problem. And when I speak here, I must remind you, I think when I came to Afghanistan, it was after September 11. It was the first death anniversary of national hero of Afghanistan, Mr. Ahmad Shah Massoud. And I said in that first function, I said, please, you should note that there are two Pakistans. One is a Pakistan of dictators, those who usurp power, and those who deprive the people of Pakistan from their rights. And there are people of Pakistan who have no problem with you, no grudge with you, who are your brothers, who are your sisters, who would like to have peaceful coexistence. So I believe I speak for people of Pakistan who have no grudge against people of Afghanistan, and we seriously believe that our destiny is common. We will either have respectful, good future, prosperous future together, or, God forbid, the destruction or other things also we will attack together. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, there was one question directed at me, which is, why haven't the Americans done anything about Pakistan? And the answer is, the Americans have done a lot about Pakistan, but what they have done has not been effective. And you may say, so why don't they do more? One, I'm not sure that would be effective, but more important is, the United States needs Pakistan for certain things, including it needs Pakistan in order to have access to Afghanistan. Because Afghanistan is landlocked, it can only, an outside power can get to Afghanistan only through Iran, you know our relations with Iran, Russia, you know our relations with Russia, and Pakistan. There was some discussion about using the lapis lazuli route after President Trump's tweet about Pakistan, but the conclusion was, at this stage at least, it's impossible to use it. It does not have the capacity that we would require. And just always bear in mind that the question of Pakistan is an existential question for Afghanistan. It is not an existential question for the United States. It's a very much secondary or tertiary kind of question. But let me just end by mentioning to our friends from China that although you spoke about a lot of agreement among Asians and so on, I think you may note that there's a very different perception of Pakistan in this room than there is in China. And one of the things that those of us who have been involved in discussion with China and outreach to China and the hope for China's involvement in Afghanistan, one of the things we have hoped for most is that China would reach more of a consensus with the Afghans, with the United States, with India, and many other countries that have suffered from Pakistan-based terrorism about the problem of Pakistan, and because we think China is very well placed in order to help solve it. And I hope that that can be discussions that we can have in the future. I'm sorry I can't give you the right of reply right now, but you will have it in private later. Now let's thank again the panelists, the organizers, and of course the city of Herat, which by itself in a way shows that the panel was misnamed, because you cannot say that Herat is in South Asia. Herat is where South Asia, Central Asia, and West Asia come together, and we can see that in the design, in the paintings, and so on that we have before us. Now let me turn it over to the organizers.